What's up everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Veronica. If you're new here, I have a slow fashion studio called Vade, and I'm so excited to be bringing you guys my first digital pattern, which is this sleeveless zip up vest. I'm going to be giving you a step-by-step tutorial on how to make this vest, and the pattern will be linked down below if you want to purchase it. It's available in sizes small to large. I'm working on expanding the sizing. This pattern is based off certain measurements for each size, but it's impossible to make patterns to fit every single body type, of course, so please make a mock-up first and adjust it to your body type and then cut it out of your final fabric. I'm going to be showing y'all two ways to finish this vest. The first way is with bias tape, so that it has a nice, very nice clean finishing on the inside, and also a nice pop of color on the outside as well. And then with lining, this one is the one with lining and has like a really nice pop of red underneath. But of course, if you don't want to do either way, you can just serge all of the pattern edges so that it's nice and clean on the inside if you have a serger. But I wanted to give an option for anyone who doesn't have a serger and wants to still have really nice clean finishing on the inside, because the inside is just as important as the outside. If you make this pattern, please tag me in your photos. Please leave a review on my website. I want to know what you think. This is the first of many. I'm planning to drop one every single month. And make sure to follow us on Instagram so you can keep up with everything that we are creating, all of our events, workshops. But without further ado, let's just get straight into the tutorial. First thing you want to do is print out your sewing pattern. It's available in US letter and A4. Make sure to print it out at 100% scale and reference your layout page so you can tape all the pieces together. I like to fold over the excess paper on the black edge and then tape in all of the connecting areas so that I don't waste tape and I have less cutting to do. Cut it out, and now you're ready to start cutting it out of your fabric. For your supplies, you're going to need paper scissors, fabric scissors, or a rotary cutter and mat, chalk or fabric pen, pins or fabric weights, iron-on interfacing, a 1/4 inch bias tape, which is optional, a medium weight fabric like denim. I'm going to be using a couple pair of jeans to make the first vest, or a cotton, bamboo twill, wool, leather. I'm going to be using this wool gingham to make the second vest. And for that one, you're going to need a lightweight lining fabric. A separating zipper that's between 14 and 16 inches. Now you're ready to cut your pattern pieces out of your fabric. I'm going to be using 2 pairs of jeans because 1 pair isn't enough for my size. And I was able to put most of the pattern pieces on 1 pair, but I put the back piece on the other pair of jeans so that I could line up the center back on the fold of the denim so that there would be a seam in the back. Make sure to line up the pattern pieces with the grain line on your fabric and mark it all out. In the pattern pieces, there's also notches, so don't forget to cut and mark your notches. So whenever you're sewing, you can easily align your pattern pieces. You're also going to need to cut out 2 pieces of interfacing. After all your pieces are cut out, I went ahead and ironed on the interfacing for the collar, and I like to use a piece of muslin over it so that I don't damage the fabric or the interfacing. And you want to make sure to iron on the interfacing on the wrong side of the collar pieces. Now you're ready to get into sewing. Make sure to change your sewing machine needles to coordinate with the fabric that you're using. We're starting off by lining up the side front panel with the center front of the vest, and you're going to line it up at the notches and then pin, and then you're going to sew it with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, which is the distance from your needle to the very edge of your presser foot. You're going to repeat that same exact process for the other side of the front, and then the same thing for the 2 side panels in the back connected to the center back panel as well. After you've connected all of the side pieces to the center front and back, you're going to connect them at the shoulder seam and the side seams, making sure that you're placing the panels right sides together. And all of the seam allowance throughout this whole project will be 1 centimeter. This is the perfect time to try on the vest and make sure that everything is fitting how you would like. Now you want to take it to your iron and press open all of your seams. I like to press the seams open and then I press them all to one side, because for this one we're going to be adding bias tape to all of our raw edges so it looks nice and neat. We're going to be using a 1/4 inch bias tape, and the first thing you want to do is open up the bias tape on one end and Attach it to the raw seam of your seam allowance, making sure to align the raw edge of the bias tape with the raw edge of the denim. You want to sew along the crease of the bias tape. You then want to fold over that excess bias tape and top stitch it on the other side, so now it is nice and neat. And you want to repeat that exact same process to every single seam on the inside. Your shoulder seams, the side seams, the princess seams. And I decided that I also wanted to do a top stitch on the princess seams, but it's completely optional. Now we're going to move on to adding the bias tape to the armholes. I cut off any excess fabric from the bias tape that was peeking out of the armhole and any strings, and then I measured out the armhole, which for me was 9 inches, and then I added about half an inch for seam allowance, and I doubled that, which turned out to be 19 inches long, so I could cut 2 strips for each armhole. So you should have 2 19-inch bias strips for each armhole. I then opened up the folded edges of the bias tape and sewed at centimeter so that I would end up having a completely closed loop piece of bias tape, and I lined it up with the armhole to make sure that it fit, and then I cut off that excess seam allowance. I removed the arm in my sewing machine so it'd be easier to sew the armhole. You're going to repeat the same process as before, sewing the bias tape along the raw edge of the denim and sewing on top of that folded crease and folding it over again to do the top stitch. And you're going to repeat that exact same process for both armholes. I then went ahead and added bias tape to the center front of the vest where the zipper would go, but I should have sewn the zipper on first so that the edge of the zipper would have been encased in between the bias tape, but I didn't think about it until after. But it doesn't matter, it still gives the exact same results either way. To attach the zipper, you want to turn your zipper upside down, so the correct way should be facing the fabric, but make sure to line up the very top edge of the zipper with the top edge of the collar and then pin it in place. I then take the other end of the zipper, the right side, and attach it to the right side of the center front panel the same exact way, making sure that you flip over the zipper piece, which in this case it is a separating zipper, so you can just remove the 2 pieces separately, but I like to make sure that the jacket is lined up and zips up and is even before I separate them. I then switch my sewing machine foot to a zipper foot and I sew right along the teeth of the zipper. And you want to get close but not too close that you actually sew into the teeth, because you can break a needle or you might not be able to zip up or down the jacket. Whenever it gets to the part where your foot is in the way, it is very difficult to sew around it. So I like to sew all the way down until I reach it, and then I keep my needle in the fabric. I lift up the presser foot and then I scooch the zipper pull out of the way towards the top so that I can continue my stitch and it's not in the way. I then flipped over the zipper so that the raw edges would be on the inside, and I did a top stitch along the edge. I also didn't show it, but I also added bias tape to the hem of the jacket as well, so every single edge has bias tape in this design. Now to move on to attaching the collar. You want to sew your 2 pieces together with the right sides facing each other and start sewing 1 centimeter away from the raw edge of your collar so that you have space to attach it to the vest. I then cut off the corners so that there would be less bulk, and then I used a scissor, which I don't recommend using a scissor because you can poke a hole, and push out the corner so that it looks nice and neat, and then I ironed it flat. This collar has an extended 1.5 inches so that it wraps around the front, so you're actually going to connect one edge of the collar to the right side of the vest, making sure that it is flush with the zipper and the collar are lined up. After sewing it together, you're going to cut snips into the seam allowance, but not through the stitch. You want to cut just right before the stitch. This helps the neckline to curve a lot better. You then want to iron your seam allowance up so that it's encased in the collar whenever we fold it over and top stitch it around. And then on the other half of your collar, you want to iron 1 centimeter down so that whenever you fold over the collar, everything is all lined up, and just press continuously and pin everything together. You're then going to take it to your machine and do a top stitch all the way around, closing up that opened edge that you had on the collar and sewing it all the way around just to add an extra detail. For the button at the top, I used these snap fasteners, which are honestly kind of complicated to attach. So I suggest just following the directions, and I had to hammer these pieces outside on the concrete because it was extremely loud in my apartment and the pieces would not stay in place unless I hammered it extremely hard. So I don't fully suggest these snaps because they're really hard to attach, but you can use any kind of button or sew on snaps. So this is just one version that you can make the vest to have really clean finishing on the inside if you don't have a serger. But now I'm going to show you how to make the vest with lining. You're going to cut your pieces out exactly the same as we did the denim vest. Besides, you're going to cut out of your shell fabric and your lining fabric, and you only need collar cut out of the shell fabric and interfacing. You don't need to cut it out of your lining. You're going to sew all of your pieces together the exact same way, and you should end up with 2 pieces, which we're going to combine together. Now you want to place your 2 pieces with the right sides of your fabric facing each other. And the first thing we're gonna do is sew the hem of our jacket first. So after sewing that, we're gonna cut snips into the fabric so some tension is relieved in the curves. So now we're gonna do a understitch on the lining fabric, making sure that you're sewing the seam allowance underneath. This way the lining fabric won't curve onto the front of the jacket and you have a really nice and neat hem, and it should end up looking like this. I then turned the vest over and we're going to connect the armholes. So you want to fold over the lining and shell fabric and connect them with the right sides facing each other, pin all the way around, making sure that each seam, the princess seam, the shoulder seam, the side seam, all align with each other. And you're gonna sew along 1 centimeter around as well. Then we're going to cut snips into the seam allowance just like we did with the hem so that the curves have less tension. And then I also did an understitch along the lining of the fabric as well so that the lining doesn't pop out of the front. Once you're done with that one side, we're gonna move on to the other armhole and do the exact same process of flipping it over and pinning the right sides of the fabric together and sewing it around. Now you should have 2 sewn armholes and the hem. And now we're moving on to attaching the zipper, which I attached the exact same way as the denim. Besides, I only attached it to the outer fabric. You do not want to sew it onto the lining. You only want to do it on the shell fabric. To attach the collar, I took the exact same steps as the denim vest. The only difference is that we need to attach the other end of the collar to the lining fabric. So we're going to fold the vest in half and attach the lining edge to the edge of the collar on the other side, and basically the entire vest will be sandwiched in between and it'll look like a taco. And then sew again at 1 centimeter. After you have it sewn, just pull out the jacket from the side, and the only openings you should have are where the zippers are. Now we're gonna close up one of the ends. So I'm gonna put my hand through and pull out that edge with the lining and the zipper inside out, and then make sure that the zipper is sandwiched in between the lining so that you don't see the feet, and sew the opening shut right along the zipper feet. And to finish off the very top of the collar where the excess fabric is extended, just do a top stitch to close up that edge. Now we're going to flip out the rest of the vest right side out, and I And then I played around with the collar to fix it and make sure that it was completely out. And now to close up the final opening, we're actually going to seam rip about 4 inches in the side seam of the vest. You could leave the opening from the beginning, but I just like to seam rip into it after I had sewn the whole jacket so I don't get confused. Then you're gonna stick your hand through and pull out the zipper and lining edge so that we can repeat that same process of sewing that edge shut, making sure that the zipper is encased in between the lining and the outer shell fabric. After you sewed that up, you want to pull out the vest right sides out of that hole that we seam ripped, and then all you have to do is top stitch that opening shut. You can either just top stitch it on your machine or hand sew it shut, and you are completely finished. I hope you guys liked this vest design, and if you have any questions, please comment down below. I am here to help, and let me know which vest you decided to make. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.